In 2018, a brand new Boeing 737 MAX took off from Jakarta, Indonesia, and started diving toward the ocean. For 11 minutes, the pilots pulled back on the controls, fighting to keep the nose up. For 11 minutes, a piece of software they did not even know existed pushed the nose back down. The plane hit the Java Sea at over 450 miles per hour. All 189 people on board were killed. 5 months later, it happened again. Another brand new Boeing 737 MAX, this time in Ethiopia, with the same software fighting the same pilots in the same losing battle. 157 more people died. 2 crashes, 346 lives lost. And not because of mechanical failure or pilot error, because one of the most respected companies in American history chose stock price over human life. This is the story of how corruption killed the Boeing Aircraft Company. To understand how Boeing fell, you need to understand what it once was. William Boeing founded the company in 1916 in a small wooden hangar on the shores of Lake Union in Seattle, Washington. He was a timber baron who became obsessed with flight after riding in a rickety seaplane and deciding he could build something better. Over the next 3 decades, Boeing grew into one of the most important companies in America. During World War II, the company built the B-17 Flying Fortress, the heavy bomber that helped turn the tide of the war in Europe. Boeing's factory in Seattle was considered so vital to the war effort that the Army covered the entire roof with fake trees and houses to hide it from Japanese bombers. After the war, Boeing poured everything it knew about pressurized, high-altitude flight into commercial aviation. In 1958, the Boeing 707 launched the jet age, cutting the Atlantic crossing from 7 days by sea to 7 hours by air. But here is the detail that explains everything about old Boeing. The engineers ran the company, not the salespeople and not the finance team. The people who designed the planes made the decisions about the planes. When a safety question came up, the answer was never, how much will it cost to fix? The answer was, fix it. That culture produced the Boeing 737. First flown in 1967, it was a compact, twin-engine jet designed for short domestic routes, simple and reliable, and cheap to maintain. Airlines loved it. Over the decades, Boeing updated the 737 generation after generation, but the fundamental airframe remained the same proven design from the 1960s. It became the most produced commercial jetliner in history. More than 10,000 were delivered. Airlines around the world built their entire fleets and pilot training programs around this one aircraft. And that massive installed base of 737 operators is exactly what led Boeing to make the most catastrophic decision in its history. But first, we need to talk about the event that truly killed Boeing. Not a crash, a merger. In 1997, Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, a struggling rival manufacturer based in St. Louis. On paper, Boeing was the buyer. But what happened inside the merged company was very different. The man running McDonnell Douglas was Harry Stonecipher, a former General Electric executive who believed in one thing above all else: shareholder value. It was Jack Welch-style management. Cut costs, boost margins, reward investors, and repeat until the stock goes up. After the merger, Stonecipher became Boeing's president. Within a few years, the engineers who had run Boeing for 8 decades found themselves reporting to finance people who had never designed anything. The company's headquarters moved from Seattle, where the planes were built, to Chicago, a city with no Boeing factory at all. The message was unmistakable. Leadership did not need to be near the factory floor. Leadership needed to be near Wall Street. The transformation was immediate. Boeing started outsourcing critical manufacturing to the lowest bidder. The 787 Dreamliner, which should have been Boeing's next triumph, became a disaster. Fuselage sections arrived from subcontractors around the world and did not fit together. Wiring harnesses were wrong. Fasteners were missing. The plane was delivered 3 years late and billions over budget. But instead of learning from the Dreamliner's failures, Boeing doubled down on the strategy that caused them. Production quotas went up, while quality inspection staff went down. Workers on the factory floor in Renton, Washington, reported being pressured to keep the line moving, even when they found defects. When inspectors raised concerns, they were told they were slowing things down. In the old Boeing, if a quality inspector found a problem, the production line stopped until it was fixed. In the new Boeing, a manager would ask how long the fix would take, whether the plane could ship without it, and whether the inspector was sure it was really a problem. The question was no longer, is this safe? But is this safe enough? The old Boeing culture did not die overnight. It was strangled slowly, one budget cut and one retirement at a time, until the people who remembered what the company stood for no longer had the authority to do anything about it. This weakened version of Boeing is exactly the company that panicked when, in 2010, Airbus announced the A320neo. It was a re-engined version of their existing jet that promised airlines 15% lower fuel costs. American Airlines, one of Boeing's most loyal customers, threatened to place a massive order with Airbus. If Americans switched, others would follow. Boeing could lose its dominance in the single-aisle market, the most profitable segment in commercial aviation. Boeing had two choices: design a completely new airplane from scratch, which would take a decade and cost tens of billions, or take the existing 737, bolt new engines on it, and get it to market fast. The engineers wanted the new design. A clean sheet aircraft would be safer, more efficient, and built for the future. But a new aircraft would not be ready for years, and American Airlines was signing contracts now. The finance people won the argument, and the decision was made inside Boeing's Chicago headquarters, 900 miles from the factory floor where the planes were actually built. From 2013 to 2019, while the MAX was being developed and delivered, Boeing spent over $43 billion on stock buybacks instead of investing in a clean sheet aircraft. The priority was clear. But there was a serious engineering problem with the plan. The new LEAP 1B engines were significantly larger than the ones on the previous 737. The 737 sits very low to the ground, a design from the 1960s. The bigger engines did not fit underneath the wings in the traditional position. So Boeing mounted them higher and further forward, which changed the aerodynamics. During certain conditions, the new engine position caused the nose to pitch up dangerously, creating a potential stall. Rather than redesign the airframe to solve this problem, Boeing chose a cheaper fix, a software patch. A system called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, was designed to automatically push the nose down if sensors detected the plane was climbing too steeply. MCAS had two fatal flaws. First, it relied on a single angle of attack sensor. Most critical flight systems use 2 or 3 redundant sensors. MCAS used one. A second sensor existed, but Boeing sold it as an optional upgrade, a safety feature offered as an add-on. Second, Boeing never told the pilots about MCAS. It was not in the flight manuals. It was not covered in training. The pilots flying the 737 MAX had no idea a piece of software could override their controls and push the nose of their aircraft toward the ground. This was deliberate. If MCAS was disclosed, the FAA might require additional pilot training, which would make the MAX less attractive than the Airbus A320neo, and cost Boeing billions in orders. So Boeing kept MCAS out of the training manuals and out of the cockpit documentation. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 departed Jakarta, bound for Pangkal Pinang. The aircraft was a 737 MAX delivered just 2 months earlier. It was practically brand new. Almost immediately after takeoff, a faulty angle of attack sensor fed incorrect data to the flight computer. It told MCAS that the nose was pitched dangerously high when it was not. MCAS activated and shoved the nose down. The pilots pulled back, and MCAS pushed down again. Every time they fought to climb, the system overrode them and forced the nose back toward the ocean. This terrifying cycle repeated over 20 times in 11 minutes. The pilots were fighting their own airplane, and they did not understand why, because nobody had told them MCAS existed. The plane hit the Java Sea at a near vertical angle. All 189 passengers and crew were killed. Search teams spent weeks recovering fragments of the aircraft and the remains of the victims from the ocean floor. Boeing's response was to issue a bulletin reminding pilots of existing procedures. They did not ground the fleet. They did not disclose the full role of MCAS. They implied the Indonesian pilots had failed to follow standard procedures. Because Boeing refused to ground the MAX, on March 10, 2019, it happened again. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa, headed for Nairobi in another brand new 737 MAX. 6 minutes after takeoff, a faulty sensor triggered MCAS, and the pilots found themselves fighting the same invisible system for control of their aircraft. The crew followed the emergency procedures Boeing had issued after Lion Air. They flipped the cutout switches to disable the automated system. But the aerodynamic forces were so extreme that they physically could not move the manual trim wheel. The plane was too fast and the forces too strong. All 157 people on board were killed. Passengers from 35 countries, including a 9-month-old baby. Within days, aviation authorities worldwide grounded every 737 MAX in existence. The United States was the last country to do so. The FAA waited until China, the European Union, Canada, and dozens of other nations had already pulled the plane from service. But the grounding revealed something even worse than the crashes themselves. Under a program called Organization Designation Authorization, the FAA had allowed Boeing to designate its own employees as safety inspectors. Boeing engineers were certifying Boeing aircraft. The people whose bonuses depended on getting the plane to market on time were the same people signing off on its safety. Internal communications revealed that Boeing employees knew about MCAS problems during development. One test pilot wrote that MCAS was running rampant in simulator testing. Another employee texted that they would never put their family on a 737 MAX. These messages were not reported to the FAA. The people who tried to sound the alarm paid for it. Ed Pearson, a senior manager at Boeing's Renton factory with 30 years of Navy experience, went to his supervisors and begged them to shut down the factory until quality problems were fixed. He was ignored. He later testified before Congress that the factory conditions were directly connected to the 737 MAX failures. John Barnett, a quality inspector at Boeing's South Carolina plant, reported finding metal shavings left inside aircraft during production and improperly installed oxygen systems. He filed internal complaints. He was sidelined and pushed into retirement. Barnett sued Boeing. During the deposition phase of his lawsuit, he was found dead in his truck in a hotel parking lot. His death was ruled self-inflicted. His family and attorneys have raised questions about the circumstances. So, what happened to the Boeing executives responsible for all of this? Dennis Muilenburg, the CEO during both crashes, was fired in December 2019. He left with $62 million. He was never criminally charged. Boeing paid a $2.5 billion settlement. That sounds like a lot, until you realize Boeing's annual revenue exceeds $77 billion. The fine was roughly 12 days of revenue. No Boeing executive has been sent to prison. Not the CEO who oversaw the cover-up, not the engineers who hid MCAS from the FAA, and not the managers who silenced the whistleblowers. Compare that to Enron, where executives got 24-year sentences. Compare it to the Volkswagen emissions scandal, where a senior executive got 7 years. At Boeing, 346 people are dead, and the consequence is a rounding error on the company's balance sheet. And the problems still haven't stopped. In January 2024, a door plug blew off a 737 MAX 9 in mid-flight at 16,000 feet over Portland, Oregon. Passengers sitting next to the opening had their shirts ripped from their bodies by the decompression. Nobody was killed, but only because the seat next to the opening happened to be empty. William Boeing built his first airplane because he believed he could make something better than what existed. He hired engineers and told them to build the safest, most reliable machines in the sky. For most of a century, that is exactly what they did. Then the finance people took over. They moved headquarters away from the factory. They told the engineers to cut costs. They hid a dangerous software system from pilots. They pressured regulators. They silenced the people who tried to warn them. And when planes started falling out of the sky, they blamed the pilots. The families of the 346 victims still gather every year. They carry photos of their children, their parents, their partners. They stand in front of Congress and demand accountability. And every year, they are told that justice is still working its way through the system. Boeing is a cautionary tale about what happens when the people who count the money are allowed to overrule the people who build the machines.